What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to Nintendo Land, and today we are ranking every single boss in Kirby's Return to Dreamland Deluxe. Every single boss, that includes the mini bosses as well, for a total of 26 different bosses. We'll be ranking them based on the atmosphere, the difficulty, and how fun the boss was overall, so of course my list might be a little bit different from yours. But when getting information about Kirby boss battle and theory videos, Kirby's not the only one surfing. And when searching the internet for all this information, I need to make sure that I'm safe and secure. And that's why I'm happy to thank today's sponsor, Surfshark, who also provided the funds to make videos like this possible. Surfshark helps to protect my identity, and I get notified if my personal data has been leaked somewhere online. This is something that's made Surfshark so important for me, and as a YouTuber it's a pretty important thing to keep track of. And outside of security, I've also used it for gaming benefits to play some Japan exclusive games because you can have access to region locked or region isolated games or features. How else would I play Kuduro and Squash? I'm sorry guys, Nintendo got me addicted to this franchise already. But what is the purpose of a VPN? Well, it makes what you do online private, and it takes your location to somewhere else around the world in just one click, and Surfshark specifically has 3,200 servers in over 100 countries in order to do so. Purchasing a 24-month VPN plan is seriously super easy, and it's the best option to do so with Surfshark because you also get a 3-month extra 83% off, and all you have to do is scan the QR code or click on the link in the description and use my promo code Nin10doland. And once again, big thanks to Surfshark for sponsoring today's video. Coming in at number 26 and starting the list, we have King Doo. King Doo is just a big Waddle Doo with a nice little haircut, but it is just a big Waddle Doo really. It doesn't really have many attacks, and its attacks are very slow, and it barely moves across the stage, giving you plenty of time to hit the thing. It almost like doesn't put up any fight at all. There are a couple of bosses in this game that are pretty weak, but this one is without a doubt the weakest. I guess you can say he doesn't do much. Get it? Next up we have Moundo. Moundo also doesn't have many attacks either because he is the attack. He's just a big rock that tries to land on you by jumping up in the air, and that's pretty much the extent of its attack range. So all you gotta do is just move out the way as it charges at you very slowly and drops from the air. There's not a lot going on with this boss battle. Next up we have Gigant Edge, which is another returning staple in the Kirby franchise now, and it's just a big guy with a big sword. He has a couple of slashes, but if you get behind him, it's really a breeze, and that's the main problem with this boss. Is just jumping behind him. That shield really does nothing. Next up we have Water Galbaros at number 23, because I feel like this is also like Moundo but with water effects, because he does essentially the exact same things but has some new effects around him. For instance, he can spin around and shoot out water, but he dashes forward towards you the same way as Moundo. He jumps in the air and tries to land on you just like Moundo. It's essentially the same boss but just with water effects. For number 22 we move on to our first actual boss battle in the game, and that's Whispy Woods. And of course, poor Whispy Woods gets done dirty because it's just very bland. You just walk up to the tree and hit it with whatever you got as it slowly drops apples on you. I mean, there are little mid-bosses in this game that are better than Whispy Woods. The only actual threatening attack Whispy Woods has is he tries to suck you in, and then every now and then, shoots some spikes from the ground. His X version shoots a lot more spikes, so you have to keep moving back and forth, which keeps you on your toes a little bit. But overall, Whispy Woods is really just a static boss that sits there and lets you just beat him to a pulp. Certain weapons at your disposal, you can take Whispy out in literal seconds. Number 21, we have Kibbleblade, which tries to put up somewhat of a fight. It throws these boomerang blades at you, and sometimes he'll jump in the center of the stage and throw a giant one around him, which can be very distracting, and it's actually a little bit interesting. At least they throw something at you and try to attack you, so I think Kibbleblade is technically a little bit better than even the first actual boss battle of the game. I'm sorry, sue me. Bonkers has made his way into a series staple for the Kirby franchise, and is still a lot of fun to fight to this day, and he has lots of different attacks. He can swing his hammer around just like you, just have brutal hits against the ground, or also uppercut you with his hammer, but also he has projectiles such as bomb seeds that he can throw at you, which is just a pretty neat attack. And at number 19, our last main mini boss, we have Dubior. Dubior is a new type of boss for this game, which is like a little UFO guy, and it's just something about its design which is super cute and super cool. We don't have too many bosses or mini bosses that have the spark ability, but this one uses it in a really good good way. It chases you around the stage and tries to hit you with those lightning strikes. It also just zips and zaps everywhere and has really nice animation. It can spawn little mini ones, and it can also fly at you in different looping patterns. Nubior is actually a very creative boss fight for just a mini boss. Number 18, we have Mr. Duder. Mr. Duder has a couple of tricks up his sleeves where he can juggle some things and throw them at you, and he'll bounce up and down from the sky, landing on the ground. But one of his really impressive attacks, which is actually very powerful, is a giant fiery fist, and it gets even harder to dodge with his X form, where it just sets the stage on fire too. Mr. Duder is really just a bouncy fellow. I wish he had a couple more magic tricks up his sleeves. That would have been pretty cool, but overall, he's still a pretty average boss fight when you look at the rest of the roster. Number 17, we have the Rampaging Doomers. Now, these are based off of the Sphere Doomers from the main game, but the only reason why I'm not a huge fan of these versions because they just kind of fly around and just shoot random orbs everywhere, and like these little patches of smoke that hurt you, they just feel random, and it's just very chaotic and just a little too much going on the screen at once. And they all have the same elemental effect of that little purple poison gold dust that they drop, and it's just not that interesting to me. I feel like it's just too much going on. They blend in with the background, and it's kind of hard to see what's happening all the time. Number 16, I would say the slightly better version is the original Sphere Doomers. They all have different elemental attacks, is what makes them very interesting. Some have electricity that shoot bolts everywhere. Some have the flame ability to fly across the stage. Even some have ice abilities, which drop like ice bombs across the stage that can really hit you hard. And I really like how they can kind of spawn together, like in the arena and the true arena, and it feels like the Rampaging Doomers, but not too chaotic since there's normally only 2 on screen at once. So yeah, I don't know what it is, but I feel like the original Sphere Doomers just did it a lot better. Coming at number 15, we have Fatty Puffer, because you couldn't just sit there and play nothing but offense. You had to play defensively, because it would also be invincible, and it could grow to massive proportions, where you would just have to get out of the way at the right second, and you have to pay attention to its attacks instead of just wailing on it, which is what I liked about this boss. You can't just sit there in one spot and just completely wailing on the thing. You have to learn how to go to the top of the screen, the bottom of the screen, and even learn how to dodge with the new mechanic in this game. Sometimes finding unique ways to dodge the enemy instead of just spamming one button the entire boss fight is what I really like, and this was definitely one of those boss battle examples. And at number 14, we have Fiery Puffer, which is the fire version from Magalor's Epilogue. Now this one just was a little bit more difficult. Every time it landed on the ground, it had shock waves of fire, and it actually used the background a lot more for its roll attacks as well, which also kind of incorporated different planes of how you had to fight this thing. But also, it had new ways of spinning across the stage. It would take new patterns on, which meant once again you had to play very defensively and know when to dodge and where to go on the screen at the right time, which once again I think is a great idea. It was just a slightly better version than the original game's version. Number 13, we have Electricky Duder. So this version of Mr. Duder is a little bit more graceful. I like the way he spins around and kind of has this lightning shocks around him. It's still very much a Mr. Duder boss fight, overall being pretty easy, but I just like the different ways that he battles you this time around. For instance, leaving the screen completely to come flying in, you have to pay attention to where the shadows are on the ground. He also has a really neat attack where he jumps into his hat, and you have to hit his hat while in the air to keep the combo going if you want to really rack up your score. But once again, I think it's one of those bosses where you can't just blindly attack. You have to pay attention to its attack patterns a lot, because not only does it shoot shockwaves from the floor, but he also can spawn enemies and disappear and reappear at any time. I don't know, I just love the background colors, I love his finesse and the way you battle him, and I just love the animation and everything about this boss battle. I think it's a really good one. This was a very tricky boss battle for me to place, because of course the X version of Metal General is extremely different, even though it adds a separate boss name, so I had to make sure that it was a separate boss. So right now we're sticking simply with Metal General, and you'll understand what I'm talking about, probably already do in a second, but Metal General is really just kind of a swordsman that tries to go against Kirby hand-to-hand combat. I'm not a big fan of the hand-to-hand combat Kirby boss battles like Meta Knight and Morpho Knight and even Galactonite sometimes because it can get a little chaotic, but I feel like this game does it in a good way without having the enemy completely spam attacks in your face and move so quickly. There's also attacks where he utilizes the background and also causes lots of rockets to fall from the air and create explosions on the ground. He can also send out different types of drones and lasers at you, and it just feels very roboticized, very futuristic, and I love actually what they did with this boss fight. Number 11, I have Hydrath, the water version of Goliath. I feel like this one was slightly worse than the original just because it didn't add a whole bunch to his moveset besides just gave him water attacks, which if anything kind of felt slower and a little easier. But I love the way that this boss moves. It can teleport across the stage and it has like this really cool ninja effect to him. If I didn't know better, I would think he was using the ninja copy ability. He's warping, teleporting from wall to wall, throwing massive attacks out and even ground pounding and just kind of reappearing and disappearing all over the stage. It's actually a really fun, engaging boss battle where you really have to pay close attention, and he has some super mighty attacks that can also devastate you if you're not paying attention. Now we move into the final 10. Starting off at number 10, we have Goliath. Goliath is just so good in my opinion, and I think the new version making him look a lot cooler, but I feel like what they did with him in the original just made a lot of sense. You know, he just has pure strong attacks. He's like the mixture of ninja and also the fighter copy ability, where he's throwing these gargantuan punches at you, hitting you with kind of Hadoukens like Ryu, just jumping, moving very fast from wall to wall. I mean, honestly, if you ask me, I thought it was a little bit more difficult with him just jumping from wall to wall instead of teleporting, because there's a lot of times he would hit me when I try to jump up and hit him. But when he gets angry, especially in the X version, he's moving extremely fast, and he has one super powerful attack where he's bouncing all the way off the walls, and he can even throw down a giant spiked ball of energy, which can blast you off the screen if you're not paying attention. I just love the boss that incorporated what it seemed to be different copy abilities from the actual game itself, and I just feel like this is still one of the harder boss battles in the entire game, and it does so in a great and fun way. Not to mention the awesome battle transitions where he breaks the floor in order to change the terrain. Next up, we have number 9, the Crowned Doomer from Magalor's Epilogue, where they once again took the main game's boss and, in my eyes, kind of downgraded it. It just felt like they gave him a lot more basic attacks compared to the original, but it still was a really good boss fight, and Phase 2 actually incorporates the background a lot more and even breaks the stage and kind of changes the scene altogether. Now this boss kind of just felt like a cultivation of all the other bosses that you fought already in one. It has different elemental attacks, it kind of plays like the Rampaging Doomers, and it just does a whole bunch of stuff that you've already seen and kind of puts you to the test, which is pretty good, and I enjoy that challenge. So I think the Crowned Doomer is a really good boss battle, but it does miss that special touch that the original had with Kirby and his special copy abilities. Landia is a really good boss battle because it has two completely different phases. Phase 1 is this four-headed dragon that fights as one central unit with tons of different projectiles it shoots out and also tries to chase you down across the stage. And Phase 2 gets really intense, but not chaotic, where all 4 of the heads will separate into 4 different mini dragons and try to hit you with different team attacks. And that's what makes it not super chaotic. They move as a unit and the patterns are clear, you just have to pay attention to how they're moving. I really love the attack where they're shooting this fireball through each other and they're bouncing it off one another. You have to pay attention to their faces and where they're aiming, and you can even get behind them and start wailing on them if you pay attention enough. And I just love this concept. But overall, I thought Landia was a pretty good boss battle. Number 7, we have Grand Doomer, which is a very challenging boss battle, but also one that's very engaging. Once again, the Grand Doomer uses a combination of all the different attacks that you see through the different Sphere Doomers with different elemental attacks as well, but it's the end what makes it super interesting because it starts to incorporate the super abilities with a boss battle, which is something that we really haven't seen in the entire game so far. So it felt like a very climactic boss battle for the end of Planet Popstar before we moved to a whole different planet and also different dimension, which I really liked. Coming in at number 6, we have HRD3. Now this was a special boss only in the X version of the game, where after you defeat Metal General X, this guy pops up, which is crazy, and in this game it actually plays the Roar of DDD theme from Kirby and the Forgotten Land, which is awesome. But it's a giant robot that shoots massive lasers at you, shoots rockets and all types of other things from the background. It can even jump on the stage itself, and it's massive when it's on the stage with you. One of the biggest bosses in the entire game when it's with you on stage. Not to mention it has 2 phases, and it's actually just a very fun boss battle to watch him break apart as you start firing at him and just pieces of him flying off. It's a very good boss battle, and I'm very shocked that this wasn't in the original game and only in the X mode. If I was to include this as part of the Metal General X boss battle as well, it'd be like 3 or 4 phases and probably one of the top 5 best bosses in this entire game, but I had to separate it for the sake of this video. Now move on to the top 5, and number 5 we have Lore and Magolor. Now, in most Kirby games, there's some type of shoot 'em up section, whether you're moving up the screen or to the right of the screen. This one is a left to right shoot 'em up battle where you're battling the Lore Star Cutter that's taken over by Magolor. It has tons of projectiles that it shoots at you where you have to move back and forth, and it's not one of those shoot 'em ups where you just stand still and just fire like repeatedly at a brain dead speed. Like, you literally have to pay close attention, especially the X version where it'll shoot so many projectiles you'll have to weave in and out. There is a button that you can press in order to go into the background for a brief second. There's a surprising amount of depth in this boss battle, and I find it very, very rare that I can go throughout this boss battle without taking any damage. You have to pay close attention, and it's not just one of these bosses, especially in the true arena, that you pass up and don't think about. This one could definitely ruin a good run in the arena if you don't pay close attention to the attack patterns. Number 4, we have Magalore. This fight reminds me a lot of the Grand and Crown Doomers because it does a lot of the same attacks and it's kind of set up the same way, especially with the super abilities at the end. But the only difference here is just it feels way more climactic than that boss battle, which it should because this is the end of the game. Magalore has so many different abilities, especially as he's warping around the stage. It's hard to hit him all the time, so you have to kind of read where he's going and where he's teleporting in order to land attacks. But he has a lot of attacks, including wormholes that will suck you up, and also tons of different enemy projections and spawning, and not to mention a whole third phase where you get to use your super abilities and cut him up. But what's interesting is you get to use different super abilities depending on the mode as well. There's 3 different ones for the regular mode, and you'll have different ones for the X version as well, which is really cool. Number 3, we have Galactonite. This was such a big surprise in the original game when you were playing in the true arena and saw Galactonite appear. It was a surprise, but also very scary because this guy can do some serious damage. Now, like I said, I'm normally not a big fan of hand-to-hand combat Kirby bosses because sometimes it can get too convoluted and they just start striking you at every opportunity. And during the second phase, he really shifts it up to second gear and starts shooting beams out of his sword, meteorites falling from the sky, all types of things. And it even leaves shockwaves on the ground now that you have to watch out and dodge for. And it feels really good to dodge all of his attacks. There's something about a boss battle where when you make good dodges, it just has a really good feeling. That's a good boss in my opinion. It's actually kind of a shame that Galactonite got kind of taken over and consumed by Morpho Knight, but at the end of the day, Galactonite definitely left a great impression in all of our hearts so many years ago, and once again, doing the same thing on the Nintendo Switch now. Number 2, we have Magalore Epilogue's final boss, Master Crown. This boss was so epic for a finale. The boss's design alone is beautiful, with the Master Crown wrapping around this rooted tree with tons of colors all over it with its colorful wings. It's amazing. The design was perfect, and in the background you have this apocalyptic event happening. It is such a beautiful scene, not to mention all the various different attacks that this tree has and it can possess. It can shoot different leaves and apple projectiles at you, drop apple seed bombs on the stage where it'll detonate and blow up. It has a super cool laser attack where it fires lasers from the background in a 3-dimensional plane. There's even attacks where the tree itself will bring itself into the foreground and kind of fill up the entire screen as it's looking at you with that giant eyeball. You get to defeat it in a spectacular manner the same way Kirby defeated Magalore with a giant sword, which is a super cool ending scene. And coming in at the number 1 spot, we have Magalors Soul. Now, Magalors Soul was actually not even named Magalors Soul, at least for the original game mode, but we're going to include it on this list because it's essentially the same boss. This is a giant, creepy new form of Magalore that's able to use many attacks. It's able to teleport, spawn enemies, use laser attacks, a whole slew of things we've seen from other Kirby games. This is the ultimate version of Magalore, not to mention he's also able to use special copy abilities as well as he uses swords and even fire. We have the actual Magalors Soul from the X mode, which actually includes new copy abilities for himself as well. For instance, he's able to use the hammer here, which is a pretty insane attack. It has a shockwave and covers the floor in ice and also drops icicles from the ceiling, and you just have to be in a perfect position to not get hit. And yes, it can flip the screen upside down, making things a lot harder, and it teleports even faster in this mode. Then we get to the true arena version where it just goes all out. He doubles pretty much everything that he does in the original version, and he has so many more attacks. He moves and teleports extremely quick. Also give him 2 new super copy abilities that even Kirby doesn't have have in this game, with like a super sand ability that shoots sand tornadoes at Kirby, and a super mecha ability that gives him 2 giant guns where he shoots these plasma balls at Kirby, which can be very difficult to dodge as well. And don't worry, all his other abilities are here too, just cranked to 100. This is a boss battle that incorporates literally everything else in this game to one epic finale for the true arena. And that is every single boss battle in Kirby's Return to Dreamland Deluxe ranked. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. If you enjoyed today's video, please stop what you're doing, make sure you leave a like and subscribe to stay up to date on all things Kirby and all things Nintendo all the time, and let me know what your list would have been down below. Thank you for tuning in, and like always, I'll see you all on the next one. See ya, guys.